SuperMOOCers, and good morning on this lovely Tuesday morning. It is Tuesday. So today we have a really great interview. We've been talking about immigration for this module, which I got up almost on time. And that was pretty impressive for me. And we are honored to have with us one of my favorite writers and one of my favorite artists. He's pretty amazing, Gene Yang. And for our module, we read American Born Chinese. So welcome, Gene.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is pretty awesome.
Oh, well, we're so honored to have you on this. I just kind of like found your email and just blind emailed you, and I couldn't believe that you agreed to do this. I was so excited.
No, I'm into education is one of my passions, and so is technology. So this is like comics, education, and technology.
So perfect.
Triple threat.
Yeah. So first of all, tell us a little bit. I know you've got some new stuff coming out. You just put out Boxers and Saints not too long ago, which is amazing.
Thank you.
American Born Chinese, and so what else do you have going on?
Well, I have a project coming out in about a month called The Shadow Hero that I'm doing with a friend of mine named Sunny Liu. Sunny's an artist based in Singapore, and he's amazing. He's done work for both DC and Marvel. His most recent stuff is probably the Sense and Sensibility adaptation for Marvel Comics.
Yeah.
But he has this art style that kind of combines the dramatic with the comedic in this really interesting way. So I've been wanting to do a big project with him for a while. Together, we're doing a book called The Shadow Hero. I have a postcard of the cover right here. That's drawn by Sunny, which is why it looks awesome. But The Shadow Hero revives a character from the 1940s. So the 1940s were the golden age of American comics. That's when comics were first becoming this mass medium, and all these little publishers started popping up and putting out these superhero characters to the public because everybody wanted to find the next Superman or Batman. Everybody wanted to get rich. So in this environment, there was a Chinese American cartoonist named Chu Hing who created for his publisher a character named the Green Turtle. And the rumor about the Green Turtle is that Chu Hing really wanted him to be a Chinese American, but his publishers wouldn't let him do it because they didn't think that a character like that would sell. So Chu Hing, being a cartoonist, reacted in this really passive-aggressive way. He basically drew those original Green Turtle comics so that you never see the character's face. You almost always just see his cape because he has his back turned towards the reader. And then when he is turned around, something's blocking his face. Like it's either another character's head, or it's his own arm, like he's punching and it's like this, or like it's a piece of furniture or something. And the rumor is that Chu Hing did this because he wanted to be able to imagine his character as he originally intended. Now, he wasn't very popular. The Green Turtle was not very popular. He only lasted 5 issues in this series called Blazing Comics, and then after that he kind of disappeared into obscurity. And then copyright laws were different back then, so the Green Turtle is actually now in public domain. Oh. Now, when I first saw these pages, these original pages by Chu Hing, I thought, man, this is amazing. But there was one thing that was missing, and that was, or two things, I guess. The Green Turtle, because he wasn't very popular and was canceled after 5 issues, we never hear his origin story. We never find out who he is, what his secret identity is. So I saw that as an opportunity for Sunny and me to fill in some backstory on this really obscure character. So that's what this is. This is an origin story of this really, really obscure character from the 1940s.
That's awesome.
Cool. Yeah,
that's so awesome. Cool. I love it. And I have read this because someone was kind enough to send me a copy. And, it is so good.
Thank you. Thank you for reading it.
It's a lot like American Born Chinese, but with a superhero twist to it. I mean,
I wanted to explore similar issues. The one thing that I didn't get to in American Born Chinese, that's a big part of the immigrant kid's experience is the relationship between the child and the parent.
Yes.
I touch on it very lightly in American Born Chinese, so I wanted to hit it harder in a different project, and that's what the Shadow Hero allowed me to do.
It's going to be, I think it's going to be bigger than American-born Chinese, especially in the education arena, because it's outstanding.
So I'm curious,
Well,
in the
thank
shop
you.
bureau, do you kind of emulate a little bit what was done in the 40s, like the obscuring of the face or any of that style?
Yeah, the art was primarily handled by Sonny, and he actually he does this homage. He does a sequence that's kind of an homage to the original comic. So once our main character gets his final superhero costume, he tries on a different superhero identity that doesn't work out. But when he gets his final identity, his final secret, his superhero identity, there's a sequence where you don't see his face for a while, and that was Sonny's way
Nice.
of paying homage to those original comics. Yeah, the original comics. I mean, they're definitely a product of their time. You know, even though the creator was an Asian American, I'm sure he wouldn't have identified in that way because the whole Asian American movement didn't happen for another 2 decades, right? So he probably. I don't even know if he would have identified as a Chinese American. He probably would have just called himself Chinese. So what he does in these original Green Turtle comics is he takes a lot of the stereotypical imagery that had been applied to him and his community, you know, since the late 1800s, and he uses them against the Japanese. So in his depictions of the Japanese, he uses a lot of just really crazy, like, you know, exaggerated facial features and those sorts of things.
Cool. Well, we better get to. I could just talk all day about this. So there's a lot of questions. I'm going to ask first Steve Haley. He is an educator, and he says, as someone who has spent a lot of time speaking in public schools, do you feel like the public school classroom has become a more comfortable place for new immigrants, minorities, or is it still an experience much like that of Jin Wang's?
I think it depends on the community. You know, when I go to these different schools and talk to people about the issues behind American-born Chinese, in some places, you know, I'll go and it's usually a fairly diverse school. It usually has a fairly large population of Asian American students, and a lot of these Asian American students will come up and they'll tell me that they thought the book was kind of fun and funny, but they just couldn't relate to it at all. And in a sense, I feel like that's kind of good, right? That maybe the emotions that I went through when I was a kid are completely foreign to them. And then in other places, you know, I'll meet the children of immigrants, and regardless of where their parents are from, they'll come up and they'll tell me that they felt like they really connected with the book, that the book really expressed a piece of their life. So I really do think that it depends on the community now.
Oh, okay, that's awesome. Following kind of up on, you talked about your experiences a little bit.
Sean Churchill asked, do Jin's or Wei Chen's experiences mirror anything that happened to you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, American-born Chinese is definitely fiction. You know, I never met the Monkey King, but I did pull pretty heavily from my own life in order to do that story, especially the middle storyline, the one about Jin and Wei Chen. I pulled pretty heavily. Those two characters are actually based on these two groups of Asian American boys at my junior high. So my junior high had a very small population of like an Asian American minority, you know. But there were enough of us that there were a couple of different groups. And my group, we were mostly born in America. We spoke English to each other. We didn't have accents. We mostly wore American clothes and watched American movies and listened to American music. And then there was this other group of Asian American boys. They came when they were much older. They came you know, in 4th or 5th or 6th grade. They spoke English with accents. They usually spoke to each other in their native tongues. They wore these funny clothes with misspelled English words on them, and they would watch Asian movies, listen to Asian music, and we had this weird relationship with each other. You know, like we were kind of friends. We would say hi to this other group in the halls. We would help them out in class if they needed it. But in a lot of ways, I think we were kind of ashamed of them or something. We would make fun of them behind their backs. We'd call them FOBs, fresh out the boats. And whenever we were in a larger context, we would want to make sure people understood that we were two separate groups, that we were not with them, you know. And as an adult, I look back on this. I look back on the way we treated them, and I feel kind of ashamed. But I also think that, you know, it really didn't have anything to do with anything that other group had done or who that other group was. It had everything to do with how we felt about our own cultural heritage, you know, and we're kind of acting it out against this other. We kind of, I think Asian Americans in general, a lot of us struggle with feeling foreign, even if we, you know, our family had been here for generations. So the way we dealt with that in junior high was we just made fun of these kids who we thought of as even more foreign than us.
Yeah, I think that's a thing with a lot of kids in that age, though. You feel bad about how you treated certain people. So
Yeah.
it's really expressed well in this book. The one scene where the one boy comes up and talks in Chinese, he's like, don't talk like that. It's such a powerful scene. It's amazing.
Well, thank you. But I mean, that is something I did, you know. So it's horrible, but.
No, it's not. It's not horrible. So
I think it's called growing up.
It's called growing up.
Yeah, junior high, I just think it has this way of bringing out the jerk in people, you know.
Oh
Junior high
yeah.
song. Joe Music asks, how did you arrive at using Sun Wukong in your story? Something from childhood? Was the character intentionally placed in the story to bring people to think about Chinese history?
Well, you know, I grew up with Sun Wukong, with the Monkey King. When I was little, my mom used to tell me his stories at bedtime, and I always loved him. You know, I think that's true of pretty much any Chinese or Chinese American kid out there. You know, he's well, really, I think that he's a monkey, and boys love monkeys. You know that, right? Boys love monkeys.
Everyone.
And he also knows how to fight kung fu. So he's like this kung fu fighting monkey. He's like the perfect character for a 6-year-old boy. So I've loved him since I was a kid. When I started doing comics as an adult, I knew I wanted to do some kind of adaptation of a story. So I started reading translations of Journey to the West. Journey to the West is the novel that first tells the story. It was written about 500 years ago. And in China, it's considered one of the 4 pillars of Chinese literature. So it's a big deal over there. It's like Shakespeare, you know. So I read several translations of Journey to the West, and I also started looking into Monkey King comics from Asia. And what I discovered was in Asia, the Monkey King is so popular. He's like his own genre, you know. Almost every working cartoonist has done something with the Monkey King. So I became really intimidated. You know, I had originally planned on just doing like a straight adaptation of a story, and I realized that in China and in Japan, tons of straight adaptations already exist. So it just felt redundant. It felt like I wasn't adding anything new to the world if I did something like that. Eventually, I hit on this idea of using the Monkey King as a way of talking about the Chinese American experience, because I figured none of those Asian artists had ever been Asian American, so this could be something new I could do with the character. And that's why I wanted to include him.
Cool.
I remember the first time I read this book, and I was thinking, what? I don't even understand. There's these 3 storylines. What? There's no way they can come together. And they did, and it was amazing. So I'm glad. I love the Monkey King.
Thank you.
You love monkeys, yeah. So.
Yeah. See, it's a genetic thing, I think.
Everybody loves
monkey.
Yeah. Everybody, yeah.
Monkey.
Jeffrey Whitman asked, did you get any negative feedback for Chen Qi, and if so, from what sort of groups?
Oh yeah, that's the most controversial part of the book. You know, early on, right before the book came out, my publisher sent a whole bunch of preview copies to these different independent bookstores all over America. And there were a couple of Asian American-owned bookstores that flipped through the book and refused to carry it. So I had to write this essay. It was like getting punished in high school, actually, you know, where you write essays about why you did bad things. I had to write this essay about what I was trying to do with this character. And my publisher posted this essay up on their website, convinced those Asian American bookstore owners to read the essay, which in turn convinced them to read the book. And nowadays they're among my supporters, but it took a little bit to get there. I think I would say that for that Chinky character, I generally get 3 different kinds of reactions. First is, most people would say that they find him really funny, but they feel weird about laughing at him. They feel really uncomfortable. Like they laugh at Chinky with this knot in their stomach. And that's kind of what I was going for. I feel like racism can be really funny. But it can be funny in 2 really different ways. It can be funny in a way where the racist ideas are so ridiculous that they're laughable, which is kind of what I was trying to go for. Or it can be funny because deep down inside you think those racist ideas are true. So I think that can be kind of a fine line. Do you guys remember the Dave Chappelle show?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, so I feel like he really played with that. I mean, that was what his show was all about, was playing with that line right there. And I think I've read interviews with him, and I think he eventually quit that show because he felt like America couldn't handle it. They didn't find, like, most Americans. He was afraid that Americans weren't on the right side of that line, right? Mm-hmm. But in any case, that's one of the big reactions I get. The second reaction I get, usually from older Asian Americans, is that once they hit those Chinky chapters, they feel so uncomfortable that it's hard for them to finish the book. I hear that from Asian Americans in their 50s and 60s, and then I get a very small minority of readers who come up and tell me things like, "Oh, that Chinky character, he is so cute. Have you ever thought about putting him on a T-shirt or like making a plush doll?" And those folks, like my big regret for American Born Chinese is I didn't exaggerate Chinky even more, because I feel like if I had made him even more exaggerated, maybe it would get through to this small minority of readers.
Well, that's interesting because Felix asked, which one? I was wondering why you decided to format the chapters with Cousin Chin-Key as a sitcom. So that's kind of sitcom-ish.
Yeah. I wanted to put the laugh track underneath and have the audience clapping and stuff at certain times. That was sort of a reference to a phenomenon that I noticed with a lot of my friends and my relatives who came to America a little bit later. Mm-hmm. What I realized is that a lot of them, once they arrived, they really wanted to become like these idealized American families. And the way they figured out what an idealized American family was through American sitcoms, through like The Cosby Show or Family Ties or Growing Pains or any of those sorts of shows. And in a lot of ways they would try to mimic what they saw on TV. So I wanted to, obliquely reference that phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask Sean's question.
Okay. Sean Churchill asked, what advice would you give to those that struggle with their cultural and societal identity, as in, how does one balance and honor ancestry while also assimilating?
Yeah, I feel like that's sort of one of the quintessential problems of being an American, right? Is how do you balance these? How do you balance the individual with the community? How do you balance the new with the traditional? I think all of us are trying to figure that out. One thing that I realized, especially after getting to talk to people about this book, is that I think more of us have felt like outsiders than not. So the experience of being an outsider is almost like something that we can bond over. Almost like something that the majority of us can bond over, and it almost I think it almost doesn't matter what your cultural heritage is. Almost all of us have something that makes us different or makes us an outsider. For instance, I have a friend who is white, and she grew up in this predominantly Japanese American community in Hawaii. And when we talk, I think even though we came from 2 different cultural vantage points, we went through very similar emotions as kids. She would tell me that when she was a kid and she would go to the beach to hang out with her friends, on the way to the beach she would start feeling so self-conscious and so ashamed of how pale her feet looked compared to her friend's feet. That she would make sure to get her feet really, really dirty before she got to the beach. So even though we come from two different cultural heritages, she went through very similar emotions to me. So that's one thing, is just to realize that this is something that a lot of people go through. And second, I think for me personally, doing this book was kind of therapeutic. It was like a catharsis moment for me. So I would encourage doing art as a way of figuring it out. Doing art as a way of figuring out how to bring together the culture and the identity that you're trying to build for yourself here, and the cultures and identities that make up your past.
Well, that kind of leads into a question from Evan, which is, what inspired you to tell this story using comics? And also, then he follows up with, what other comics can you recommend that tell stories with similar themes?
Well, I did it as comics because comics are awesome. Because I grew up as a comic book fan, and I don't know. This is just the medium that I am most comfortable in. Just simply because I grew up as such a big comic book geek. I really think that comics offers the creator a bunch of different advantages over other media. Every medium has distinct strengths, but for comics, first you get the intimacy of reading. I think there's something very intimate about reading that you don't necessarily get through things like movies or television. And second is that you have this interplay between the text and the image. So for each piece of information I want to convey to my reader, I get to make a decision. Do I put this in the words, in the word balloons or the caption boxes, or do I do this through the pictures in the panel? And I think each of those offers a different sort of emotional experience for the reader. I think that words, when you put emotion through words, often you can get more subtle emotions. You can pull out some subtleties. But then when you do it through the picture, I think it's sort of like putting an emotion directly in your reader's gut, almost bypassing their brain. I think for something like stereotypes, ethnic stereotypes, addressing those through visuals as opposed to through text, I think, is a much more effective way, because you kind of feel it, right? Like if I described Chinky to you in a paragraph of text, I don't think it would be as effective as if I just showed you what he looked like.
Yeah, that's a very impact, because again, I remember when I first saw that, and I was like, whoa, whoa, that's not right. And then you understand. Oh, I see where this is going. Okay. And it is so over the top that, when he does the PPs in the coat, which just killed me. Did that happen?
I mean, that was from when I was a kid. I never peed in somebody's Coke, I should say. I never peed in somebody's Coke. But that was like a common thing on the like, if you talk to Asian Americans around my age, I think most of us heard that, right? Most of us heard me Chinese, me play joke, me go pee in your Coke, just on the playground.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, it's crazy. It was a nutty thing.
That's awesome. All right, Wendy Whipple. She asks a question. Well, she states, it's a shame that Jin felt that he had to bury his own ethnic identity so much to the point of becoming Danny. But I'm sure that's a pressure felt by many minority students to assimilate into normal American society. How much assimilation is too much? Learn a new language but skip the perm?
That perm thing was based on, I had a friend in junior high who did that. So I had this friend, he was probably the most popular kid in our group. He was like an awesome athlete. He had all these girlfriends. He was super good looking, really tall. And then one day he just came to school with this crazy perm. I couldn't understand why he would do that. But I don't know if he did it for the same reason that Jin does in the book. But that was such a stark memory in my head that I wanted to include it in my book. But I don't know if I have a good answer to that, like how much assimilation is too much. I think one thing to remember is that America isn't a monolithic culture. I think from the very beginning of what America was, how the country was established, America was always set up to be a culture of subcultures, a bunch of different groups that maybe have their own identities that are able to work with and coexist with one another. For Asian Americans specifically, I think we're sort of in the middle of defining what that is, defining what an Asian American is, and figuring out what the relationship is between the culture of our parents and the American culture that we find ourselves in. So I visited China for the very first time about 10 years ago. And on that trip, I really realized, I'm not Chinese. I'm really very much a Chinese American. The way I view the world is influenced by both the East and the West. It's very heavily influenced by both my parents, but also by just simply growing up in America. I feel like I've really internalized a lot of American values and American perspectives. So really, I think that if I went and try to become as Chinese as possible, I don't know if that would necessarily be true to myself, any more than getting a perm and dyeing my hair blonde.
So, your friend, when he permed his hair, did his popularity go down? Or
you know what? I think people started like whispering behind his back because it just looked so weird. It looked so crazy. Thankfully, it wore out after a couple of months. And then I think he was back to his old popular self.
Cool. All right.
Do Evans done?
Yeah, do Evans.
Evan asked another question. Immigration reform is currently a big issue in American politics. What approach to the issue do you advocate?
Wait,
wow. That's a big question. I have to tell you, I went through a period of time where I tried to read a lot about politics, and ultimately I just decided I don't know if that's my cup of tea. I feel like every time I read about it, I just feel so confused. I feel like I can't. It's hard for me to get a hold of the issues. I think that ultimately the key to immigration is just to remember the humanity of people, and make decisions from there.
Yeah, that people are people, not.
Yes.
Not
Yeah. I mean, I think there's value in taking a larger, almost like a statistical view of the country and the world, but that can't come at the expense of looking at humans as humans.
Yeah, I agree.
Is Hobby Lobby listening to what he's saying?
I wish Hobby Lobby was listening. Felix asked, were there any portrayals of Chinese characters in a particular TV show or film that inspired the approach to, how you did the Chinky story?
Yeah, I grew up in the 80s, so the big film that had something like that was 16 Candles. 16 Candles had this character called Long Duck Dong, he was played by a Japanese American actor, but the character himself was like a Chinese exchange student. Spoke with this crazy accent. Every time he came on screen, there was this gong that would go off. Which I just think was nutty. And I think if you talk to especially Asian American men my age, a lot of us went through this experience of going to watch that movie, and connecting with it on a certain level because, John Hughes, the director, I think is sort of the master of the American teenage movie, right, with Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Pretty in Pink. So we felt connected in the ways in which he expresses what it was like to grow up in the 80s. But then when this character comes on the screen, it's just really disconcerting and crazy. So I think he was definitely on the back of my mind. Beyond that, I looked a lot at American political cartoons, especially from the late 1800s, and I pulled a lot of inspiration from there. Like the way he's dressed, what he looks like, all of that is from there.
Okay, I'm taking up so much of your time. I know it's early for you. What else is in the works for you? We're just doing your...
Well, I've talked about the Shadow Hero already. I'm
Huh?
also involved in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Are you familiar with this property?
Yes.
Yeah.
We
It's
carry.
a Oh, okay, awesome. It's a Nickelodeon show.
Uh-huh.
It was super popular. It ended in 2008, and it was so popular that Nickelodeon created a sequel show to it called Legend of Korra, which is showing right now. And there's actually a 70-year gap between the end of the first show and the beginning of the second. So Nickelodeon asked Dark Horse Comics to create this series of graphic novels that would fill in that 70-year gap. I'm a huge fan of that original series. So when one of the Dark Horse editors called me up and asked me if I'd be willing to write this series for them, I jumped at the chance. So I've been on this for maybe 3 years, and it's just been a ton of fun. I've gotten to work with the creators of the original show, who are amazing storytellers, and I feel like I've learned a ton by working with them. I have that. I am also in the beginning stages of a middle grade series. We've signed to do 3 books so far, and this will be my very first explicitly educational series. So it'll be about coding, about programming, aimed
Oh,
at
that's
like
awesome.
5th and 6th graders.
I'll have to get that.
That's awesome.
So,
Yeah, I grew up coding too. I grew up in the Silicon Valley. I learned how to program in 5th grade, and I just loved it. So I want to try to transfer some of that enthusiasm onto the comics page.
that's great. No, I'm seriously going to get those. A question. So how is it when, with like American-born Chinese and Saints and Boxers, you do the art and you write the story? So just writing for the Avatar series, how different is that for you?
It's a really different experience. I've done graphic novels. I have a graphic novel called Level Up that I didn't draw myself. I just did the story, and a friend of mine named Tin Pham did the art. But even there, I actually handed in thumbnails. So I did the thumbnails, and Tin did the final art based on the thumbnails. So I still express the story visually, even though that's not actually what the reader of the final book sees. With Avatar, I'm actually turning in scripts. So Avatar was the very first time where I was writing just words and turning in just words, and there was definitely an adjustment there. As a cartoonist myself, I like having direct control over the visuals. But I'm lucky with the Avatar comics because the artists of it are they're called Guihiru. They're a Japanese art studio, and I think they're basically just 2 women. One does all the pencils, and the other one does all the inks and the colors, and they're amazing. A lot of cartoonists, I think, are primarily illustrators, so they just don't necessarily have a sense of storytelling. Guihiru has everything. They're amazing artists, they're amazing illustrators, and they also have this deep, almost intuitive understanding of how to tell a story visually. So it's really I'm really lucky to be working with them.
I love it when artists are good storytellers. I love it. One final question. So what advice would you give today to young people who are feeling kind of like they're not fitting in? Whether they're an immigrant or whether they've grown up in the United States but just don't feel like they quite fit in because of either how they look or their beliefs or their religion. What kind of advice would you give them?
I think first is to know that you're not alone. That the experience of being an outsider is almost universal. And if you just go and if you open up with somebody, most likely you'll be able to find some way of bonding over that. And second is I really believe in the saving power of stories in art. Go look for stories that mirror your own. They're out there, and read them. And then after you read them, maybe you'll be inspired to tell your own as well. And I really think that there's a healing power to that. There's a healing power to both reading stories, taking in stories, and also making them.
That's some of the best advice I think I've ever heard. So kudos to you.
Well, thank you.
Gene, we will let you go. Thank you so much for getting up early.
No, thanks. This is awesome. This was an honor to do. Thank you so much for inviting me.
That's so cool. But really appreciate it. And, please, SuperMOOCers, follow Gene on Twitter. I'm sure he'd answer questions and all that. So thank you so much, and I am so looking forward to when Shadow Hero comes out so I can give it to people.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's amazing. So thank you for all that you do for comics and all that you do for storytelling, because people like us, we're just great.
I'm going to learn how to code.
You should. It's fun.
We're going to be coding soon. It's no big deal.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
All right, you too. Thank you. Thank you to you both. All right.
Thank you. Bye, SuperMOOCers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.